There's a lot of disinformation out there on the internet as far as what the birth certificate actually is. So we're going to break it down for you right now. Let's dispel a few myths here. Number one, the birth certificate has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Vatican. There's a lot of Vatican conspiracy theories out there. I know Santos, he does that, and it's just a bunch of BS. First of all, the Vatican is only responsible for 1.5 billion people on this planet. However, there are 7 billion people on this planet. I myself I'm not an atheist, but I'm not religious either. The Vatican has no control over my life. So let's just get that straight right now. The Vatican has nothing whatsoever to do with the birth certificates. Another myth about birth certificates that's floating around on the internet is that it's worth millions and sometimes billions of dollars, and that you can cash it in anytime just by typing this CUSP number into the New York Stock Exchange, blah, blah, blah. Again, BS. It doesn't work that way. That is not your money. That is their money. You cannot cash out your birth certificate. So get those pipe dreams out of your head and come back down to reality. What is the birth certificate? Well, the first aspect, the control aspect, would be to transfer your human authority to govern your own offspring and transfer that authority to the state or province in Canada. They cannot, if you do not register your child, they cannot take your child from you under any circumstances. Now, there was a story floating around on the internet for a few years now, and nobody can seem to verify the validity of this story. So we'll just chalk it up to an old wives' tale, a fairy tale. Perhaps it's true, perhaps it's not. Who knows? But it illustrates the point. This woman, apparently in England, had 4 children. The first 3 had birth certificates. The last one, she had started learning about this law movement, and she decided not to get a birth certificate for the infant child. She decided not to register the child. And apparently the children's workers came in. For whatever reason, they took all 4 children from her. Now, the way that the story goes is that the next day, they brought back the infant child that didn't have a birth certificate, that wasn't registered. And apparently, according to the story, the child care worker said to the mother, "This one isn't ours," and promptly left. Now again, whether or not that story is true, I have no idea, but it illustrates the point. They cannot take your children if you don't voluntarily give them permission to by registering. Birth registration, the legislation for birth registration is different. It varies from state to state, from province to province, from country to country. The wording varies. But inevitably, you can come to the same conclusion no matter which one you're reading, from which state or from which province. They all basically say the same thing. I live in Ontario, Canada, so behind me is the Vital Statistics Act of Ontario, which is the legislation that claims that we must register our children. All right, so what I did was I sat down for 5 hours straight, looked at every single word, looked at the presumptions of every single word. And this is what I found. Now, number 8, notice of birth, this is what the professionals, the medical professionals, have to abide by. Each legally qualified medical practitioner, midwife, or nurse who attends the birth of a child in Ontario shall give notice of the birth to the Registrar General. So that's their legal duty as being a part of the medical field. They have to, as soon as the child is born, they shall give notice. In fact, I believe in Ontario they only have 24 hours in order to give that notice, because now with the internet and everything, everything's much faster. So they have a legal duty. And the word shall is defined as has a legal duty to. More broadly, is required to. This is the mandatory sense that the drafters typically intend and that courts typically uphold. Now let's jump ahead to Section 9. This is what the mother or father shall do. All right? The mother and father, or either of them, or other parent, shall certify the birth in Ontario of a child to the Registrar General. Now, what does the word certify mean? It means to authenticate or verify in writing. That sounds about right. To attest to as being true or as meeting certain criteria. So what you are doing, this is your only legal obligation, legal duty under the Vital Statistics Act. You shall certify, which is to attest to being true, to authenticate or verify in writing. That's your only legal duty. But here's the catch. Regulation 17 of the Vital Statistics Act. If the Registrar General receives and approves a statement certifying a child's birth, what we have to do up here, under this section, the statement so signed, you have to sign it, constitutes the registration of birth. Now, what did that do? You certified something, you attested to it being true, right? With your signature. It was the Registrar General, once he received that with your signature, constituted the registration of birth. You did not register your child. The Registrar General did. He took that piece of paper that you filled out, attesting to these facts as being true, and your signature on it. He took that piece of paper and created what we call the birth certificate, created what we call the person, the all caps name. Prior to the parent doing this, that all caps name didn't exist. So you think, okay, well, I only have to certify, which would be to authenticate or verify that my child was born. Great. No, that's not what's happening. What's happening is once you voluntarily admit to it, then the Registrar General has carte blanche to do whatever he wants with it. Now, Regulation 4 of the Vital Statistics Act says a person who is required to certify the birth in Ontario of a child shall make and certify a statement in the form that the Registrar General approves of respecting the birth, subject to subsection 5, shall within 30 days of the birth. All this is saying is that this legal duty that you have up here, you have to do it within 30 days. Now we get into honor versus dishonor. When you have legislation like this, where they're giving you a time limit, 30 days, a thing called honor and dishonor comes into play. What they're doing is they're giving you 30 days to remain in honor. After those 30 days, you go from being in honor to being in dishonor. And it's only after those 30 days that they're going to start sending you notices in the mail saying, you must register your child. Right? So, what is the offense if you don't? The offense is failure to give notice or to furnish particulars. Every person who neglects or fails to give any notice or to register or to furnish any documentation or particulars respecting the birth is guilty of an offense and on conviction is liable to a fine of not more than $50,000. Now, there's several components in this Offenses Act that we want to go through first of all. First of all, the words neglects and fails. You have to look at the presumptions of what those words mean. When you neglect something, what are you doing? In a case like this, you would be neglecting the law. You would say, screw it, I'm not going to register my child. I'll just wait for them to start sending me notices and then I'll deal with it with my own notices. Right? That is neglect. You neglected to remain in honor within those 30 days. Now, failure, every person who neglects or fails to give any notice. How can you fail at something? There's only one way you can fail at something, and that is by trying or attempting it in the first place. If you never attempted something, you cannot fail at it. So, when it says neglects or fails, what it's actually saying is this person attempted to register but failed to do it within the appropriate 30 days. Therefore, that person is now in dishonor. Now, it could be something as simple as you filled out the forms but you didn't sign it. So they send it back to you. By the time they send it back to you for you to sign, those 30 days have expired. You have failed to give any notice or to register. You notice how they did not use the word certify, right? Well, what is your only legal duty in Section 9? Shall certify. What does certify mean? To attest as to being true. Well, if you have a $50,000 fine hanging over your head, how can you possibly attest to something being true and be telling the truth? Because there's a question of morality there. If they're hanging a $50,000 fine over your head saying, you'd better say this is true, of course you're going to say it's true. But that's not what's going on here. And they knew that they could not use the word certify in the offenses, because that would be basically pointing a gun to your head and saying, you have to certify this to be true. So they didn't. So, what do we know from that? We know that the only legal duty that the parent has is to certify. Well, there's nothing about certifying in the offenses. So what does that mean? That means the offenses don't apply to the parent. Now, it does apply to the parents if you neglect or fail to give any notice. All you have to do is give them any notice. Any notice. Doesn't matter what the notice says. Any notice. Within those 30 days. Period. That's your legal obligation. Now, Let's talk a little bit about what a legal duty is. A legal duty, a duty arising by contract or by operation of law, in an obligation that the breach of which would give legal remedy, money. They're looking for a $50,000 fine, remember? They're looking for that legal remedy. So a legal duty is a duty arising by contract or by operation of law. Well, here we have by operation of law. Now, legal duties are not as such as you must do this. We don't live in a communist country. We don't live under Hitler. We don't live under Soviet rule. So they can never say you must do something. They can make the wording seem like they're saying that, but they're not. They will always give you an out. It's up to you to find that out. Now, with a legal duty, you can always discharge it. Discharge, what does that mean? Any method by which a legal duty is extinguished. Any method. Well, what's our method? Giving any notice within the 30 days. Plain and simple. So that's one side of what the birth certificate is for, is to gain control of the children. Physical control. So that if they claim, or even if a neighbor claims that you somehow abused the child, they can come and take that child away from you. They can't do that if you never volunteered for them to be able to do that in the first place. Now, the second part is financial. Once the child is registered